Education to order. If you would, please stand with us. I'd like to ask Ms. Cox to officiate the pledge. Thank you. Next, I'd ask if you would join me in a moment of silence. As always, there are plenty of things to remember. I think we had 2 little minor bump ups today in the school system, but everybody was okay. So as always, keep our staff and students in your prayers and thoughts, and also parents and other folks as well. So if you would bow with me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Next, we will adopt the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? Dr. Miller.
I'd like to add a discussion of several concerns that I have related to the board attorney selection process.
Okay.
Which I think is separate from the policy statement that's
okay. I understand. So we will add that as item 10 under discussion information items. And we'll put board attorney. Anything else? I would also ask, we've got 2 items, I believe, that are relatively quick items for closed session, and one of those is a personnel matter, so we were asked if we could move that to the top of the agenda just for time's sake. So unless anybody has an issue with that, we'll bump that up in front of the first discussion information item. So unless there are any other changes or deletions, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? Is there a second? There is a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed? Thank you. So we'll now go into closed session briefly. And we want to go to Julie's office. Okay.
I need to read into
it. Yeah, we will. Sorry. Let Dean read us into closed session. Sorry. I was thinking we were staying at first.
I was going to lock it. I was hitting the wrong lock. Make a motion to consider that we go into closed session to consider personnel action that involves an officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee of this board, North Carolina General Statute number 143-318-11A6, and or to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to state or federal law, North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11A1 and 143-318-11A3, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11A3, pursuant to General Statute 143-318-11A8 for the specific purpose of discussing and formulating plans and emergency responses to deal with incidents of school violence.
Is that everything?
Ian.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of entering into closed session, please raise your right hand. All opposed? Having none, we will now enter into closed session. Thank you. We'll be back shortly.
I would like to move we approve the superintendent's recommendation of the employment of Catherine Bryant as the principal at North Rowan Elementary.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Having none, that is approved. Go ahead.
Catherine, if you want to come up, and I know your parents are with you and your daughter's with you, but if you'd come up, I think the board members would like to shake your hand.
And just as a follow-up, we are glad to have Catherine. As always, we're glad to pick up new staff, and I'm sure she's going to help us, and hopefully she'll enjoy being here, and we certainly enjoy having you here. So thank you again. Next, we will turn it over to Ms. Kuhn for a few policy reviews for first read. Let's see.
Okay, so is it on? Great. First policy we have for review tonight is policy, it's a board attorney policy, policy 2610, and this is the model that the North Carolina School Boards Association has shared with us, and we currently do not have a board attorney clear policy, so we're presenting this tonight for first read. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
I do have a couple of questions. This is not replacing a previous policy, correct?
No.
Okay. And the need for this is because, is it something new that has come into existence? What's the history for the need for it?
Well,
They were very excited.
we discussed the fact that you do not have a board attorney policy. The board has been in discussion about the need to, where you've put out some requests for proposals for a board attorney. It's a statutory position, and you did not have any existing local policy. So this is just a need to align your policy with state standards.
And did you bring this to our attention? I mean, you know, is this the result of something that you advocated?
I don't think I understand your question.
Are you?
Where did the idea originate from, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, once you decided that you wanted to do requests for proposal and you were reviewing the process, I thought this is a logical piece of that process, that you would have a local board attorney policy because you did not have one.
And let me ask you this question: Is this normal as far as the NCSBA is?
Yeah, I haven't changed anything. This is their copy.
So a lot of school systems have a policy for this. We just didn't.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
And so the wording in this policy pretty much comes directly from the North Carolina School Board Association.
The North Carolina School Boards Association has like an online slate of, if you will, standard policies, and this is one I pulled from their section on board operations, which is section 2000, and the board attorney policy is 2610. So that's where I pulled it from. And we have, because you all are in the conversion process, you have access to their online manual for model policies.
One thing that that stood out to me is in the last paragraph of the policy, it talks about consulting the chair before seeking advice from the board attorney, and that has not been our previous method of operation. So
Yes, it is.
I really feel like that we need to leave that out.
That has been the previous practice, simply because there have been times where even I, in the past, when I was not the chair, sent email and asked those questions, and they were not answered. They were actually directed either to Richard or back through Dr. Moody, and the reason is because individual board members cannot accrue costs, and since there's a cost associated with an attorney outside of the retainer and a normal meeting, like for example, Chuck can't call Ken once a day for 2 weeks because obviously Ken doesn't do those things for free. So there has to be some limit. So unless I'm mistaken, I don't think, because like I said, I've had instances where I have been told that same thing.
So there weren't any instances where you did talk to the attorney without first getting in touch with the chairman of the board?
Yes, in the past, because I had sent information or questions to them, and I was basically told, look, and basically what happened was, instead of me getting a direct reply back and saying, here's the answer to your question, the answer would either go to Richard or has gone through Dr. Moody, because they basically said the same thing. Look, you can't just, not everybody can contact the attorney and accrue those costs, so we have to go through a certain parameter. And did you have...
Just so in the past, and working with this board and other boards, what we try to do is, if a board member asks a question, we want to be responsive, but there becomes an issue if different board members hear something from the lawyer and then come back to the meeting and everybody has one idea or the other of what they've heard. So if I get a question, is it in the example that your chair mentioned, I usually will answer the question, but I'll send the answer to the board chair so that everybody knows what is going on. And the main idea of that policy, and I thought you did have a board. Okay. I thought you did have a board attorney policy somewhere, but anyway, one of the main points of that policy is to make sure there's a clear line of communication so you don't end up with different people going to the lawyer and maybe getting different versions of an answer or different answers.
I understand the need for it. I just thought that previously that it did occur that the attorney would be consulted first without going to the chair, and then maybe the information did come back to the chair, but the attorney was not consulted first before the information was given out, and it didn't go through the chair.
I don't think I'm sure I'm
Okay.
clear on what you're saying.
All right. This says,
According
if
to
an
the
individual
policy,
member of the board desires to consult directly with the attorney, the board member must notify the chairperson of the legal information to be sought. I thought that previously that was not the case.
no, and what you're correct, and that's why I even made that point. But that was corrected through the process. So basically, instead of Ken or another attorney just responding haphazardly to any board member, they may respond, but they would say this needs to be directed to, and then copy either Richard and or Dr. Moody, or in a lot of cases, or some cases, they would copy the entire board. So I think all this is saying, and just for clarity, I didn't know about this before April brought it to the board. So this is not something that April and I put together for my benefit as the board chair, but we're just trying to make sure, not only for the board's benefit, but also for the attorney's benefit, that if somebody doesn't get an answer they want, they just contact the attorney. And obviously we have several attorneys depending on what's going on, so you could contact 2 or 3 different ones. So I think that's the only parameter. But again, it's at the board's discretion, so we can amend anything that you see necessary to do.
Question.
Any other questions, Dr. Miller?
In light of the language that Ms. Cox is raising, where are we if we had the situation of a board member felt there was impropriety, legal impropriety, either of another board member or of the chair, having that person to give approval for it seems to me to be a deterrent toward the opinion. So, is there an end-around play of how we deal with that kind of situation?
There should be, and I would defer that to Ken. Would you answer that question? Were you clear on that? He basically asked, obviously, if you heard the question. Okay.
So I'm trying to look at the language of the policy since I closed it out to look for the older policy. I mean, that may be something that you want to address in there specifically if there is an allegation of misconduct by the board chair, that 2 or more or 1 or more or the vice chair can be consulted. We could come up with some kind of language that would make sense.
I would agree with that, absolutely.
But you do have other policies, if they're the standard school board association policies, that provide specific ways to deal with, for example, misconduct by the chair, but they don't apply in all circumstances. They're primarily, for example, sexual harassment, that kind of thing.
And I would agree with that, so we may want to look at that in terms of whether we want to do a quorum, whether we want to do 1, 2 people, how we want to do that, but I would agree. And maybe that could be deferred to the superintendent at that point. Because generally, if I were to contact the board attorney, unless it were to pertain to the superintendent, I usually would copy her just so she kind of knows what's going on, unless there was some reason not to. So, but again, that's up to the board. So, any thoughts on that or other questions specifically about the policy?
I too think it would be good to include some definitive explanation.
And do you have any specific thoughts, Dr. Miller or Susan, in terms of what you think makes sense for ease of use for the board? Or ease of process, I should say.
I would think we need to be careful of those situations of kind of referring the board's authority back to the superintendent, because there may be those situations where there's some question about the superintendent that, have to be raised as well as along with another board member. But I would think, 2 or 3 board members, you know, the vice chair and 2 others, I think an odd number would be appropriate if we put a caveat in here for who could give approval for contacting the attorney if there was a question.
Yeah, and I think
relative
having the
to-
vice chair is good
Yeah.
as another point. Yeah, and I'm okay with either of those, 2 or 3, and we could say including the vice chair. I think that's fair, makes sense. Chuck, did you have a question or comment? Okay.
So are you saying that in that sentence, if an individual member of the board desires to consult directly with the attorney, am I hearing a suggestion that the board member must notify the chair or vice chair, or chair and vice chair?
No, I think what we're saying is that can stay the same. I think Dr. Miller's original concern was if it were an issue with the chair specifically about a legal matter or something they think is an impropriety, where do you go then? Obviously, they wouldn't come to me if that were an issue. So I think probably having 3 people on the board that share that same concern and having the vice chair be one of those people, however we want to word that in that situation.
It would be a whole new
Correct.
sentence
In
added
addition
in
to.
there.
And it would only really relate to an issue where the chair has an issue pertaining to him or her. You don't necessarily have to rewrite it tonight. I guess we could have it rewritten and look at it and then bring it back before we vote on it at the business meeting.
Okay. I think that during this process of your conversion from your current policies to the new policies, we've gone in the order of student, the 4,000 series first. We started looking at personnel, and then we've slowed down because we're about to go into budgets. But the 2,000 series has not been updated yet. So we do have an old, current policy on conflicts of interest, but it really doesn't speak to what you are speaking to. So perhaps if you would we could either address it in this policy, or I can pull the sample, some of the sample board policies on conflicts of interest or board member misconduct to present in the May meeting, if that would be okay with you. I can do either. But
We could do that. Could we do it for the end of the month business meeting? Or if we're going to look at it, I guess, and then compare, and we need to probably address it again as opposed to just
I
adding
could bring
some
it
wording.
I could bring it for April. It would just be a first read. I mean, for the business meeting.
Okay. And it's not, we don't necessarily, a matter of a couple of weeks is not a big deal. And let me ask Ken one other question. Have you had situations with school systems where this has come up? How would you respond if a board member emailed you and said, hey, I have an issue with the chair, here's what it is, I think it's a legal problem. If we had no policy, how would you respond to that?
If you had no policy, or even if you had that policy, the lawyer's ethical obligation is to the institution, to the Rowan-Salisbury School District. So I would have an obligation to take the issue up either way. I think it's good to have it spelled out so that board members who may be looking for answers to problems can find it, but that's how it would, I think, what most lawyers would deal with, and I'm sure, April, you'd have the same. As I say, our obligation is not to any one member of the board, it's to the school system. So we have to respond even, I think I'd say, well, that policy said you weren't supposed to call me, but in a case like this, we're going to have to address it, and we're going to have to come up with a solution.
So is the board comfortable? Do we want to just add that wording to the existing policy as it's laid out? Do we want to have her bring several options back at the work session and look at it, or at the business meeting rather, look at it again and then push it off for another 2 weeks? What's the pleasure of the board? Chuck?
I have no problem with the current language. I'm not opposed to what you're suggesting. But if there was a problem with the chair, the board would know about that in closed session. They could overrule any ruling the chair had, and the board could then vote, we're going to notify our attorney about this. So I think that covers itself. As I said, I have no real objection to the added language, but I don't think it's necessary.
Any other comments? Dr. Miller?
I just think it fits into the discussion of the policy that we're looking at, and so adding that sentence here would be appropriate, even if it's referenced or duplicated in the other conflict of interest one. A concern with a chair approving legal things may not be a conflict of interest issue. It may be some other illegality or concern that a board member would have. So that's why I think it's relevant here, and adding that one sentence would be an edit that's appropriate for the end of the month meeting.
Any other comments? If not, I totally agree. I think that's perfectly fine, and I'm okay for the board to give her direction. April, if you just add that, and then we'll look at it at the end of the month, and we can probably just approve it with the other ones on second read. Fair enough? Okay.
Okay.
Next policy will be loss prevention.
And I'm looking back for our risk management.
Sharon.
Let's try to catch her at this. Had a heart attack. I didn't post it with the number, but it's on the second page. So our old policy, or current policy, was on safety hazards, and Sharon, I know, worked really hard with our insurer to update our policies. This policy, I don't think, had been updated in quite a few years, and basically goes over our accident investigation procedures, preventative measures, corrective actions, safety and education and training. And so I'll just open it that way and ask if you have any questions. I know Sharon could provide you some more insight as well.
Any questions, Chuck?
Yeah, I have a question. How does this differ, just in general, from the old policy that we have? Sometimes it's hard to read that and then come back to the new policy that's being presented and not see the differences that are there. So if you could just give a little paragraph or so about how this differs, I'd appreciate it.
Well, it's quite a bit different. As I mentioned, the previous policy, and I can't recall the exact date, but it had not been changed in quite a few years. There have been updates in OSHA, in just different accounting and accountability measures that school systems must follow.
And April, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I want to make a point, just to keep us from going through things. Both of those, the old and the new, were actually posted. Did everybody have that? So I would say, instead of having them go through the difference, if we haven't seen those and compared them side by side, just review them between now and the business meeting. And that way we can lay them side by side and do that, as opposed to doing it in the meeting, just for the sake of time.
And I can give you a short answer to that, is we're just greater than what we used to be. We're doing more. We're better at not having accidents. Our mods rate is lower. We're one of the top 5 in the state for workers' comp, in that we just don't have accidents. At my meetings, at my risk management meetings, they'll ask me, how many accidents did you have last year? Well, 56. Well, how many people was that? Well, it's 20,000. Well, how do you do that? 3,000, excuse me, I'm on students. And it's a collaborative effort of all of our schools and our staff doing what they're supposed to do. They just have a safety awareness about them, that they care. We were cited from OSHA with an accommodation letter of what we were doing. Most school systems are cited with a fine. We received a letter on how well we were doing. We're going back in after the fire marshal, and we're making sure what he wants taken care of is taken care of, and it's taken care of before that 30-day. When he comes back, it's all done. Going back in behind the health department and making sure that they're getting their needs and their wants met. We're just better, and we're better at what we used to do.
Questions or comments about either of these? Any changes or issues with the new policy versus the current policy?
Just for the record, that last amendment was 8 years ago, so that in and of itself is enough to adjust.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
We were a loss control school system, and we are now a model school.
That's great. Okay, if nothing else, then we will bring that back for second read at the end of the month, and we'll move on to workday and overtime.
And this policy, policy 7500, we brought this one forward for a few reasons. One is that we, as you are aware, during our snow days, we had some conversations, and we'll talk later about this in the board meeting, about what is the actual length of the school day for professional staff. Some of those, our current policy was outdated, and it's in several different, like this is one concise policy. You'll note that there are pieces of this in several different policies in our old manual. We did not have that concisely aligned, and this policy, again, this is a model policy from the North Carolina School Boards Association, and so this is why we're bringing this one forward right now. If you will look at the second page, there is a highlighted portion. It reads, employees will be provided a copy of this policy and will be required to sign this policy to acknowledge their understanding of overtime and compensatory time provisions, and that policy will constitute the written agreement required in this section. And we, as you know, we're in a digital conversion. One of the things that Ms. Rowan and I discussed was eliminating or adjusting this to represent that that employees are signing off online on this policy instead of there being a written, printed out policy that they receive this. So,
Questions or comments? Chuck?
Yeah, just to make, for clarity, these three policies are being combined into one policy, the old policies? That's what it looks like here, current policy, current policy, current policy, and proposed policy. So those proposed policy is covering all three of those elements.
no, it is not. If you look at and I can't see, but one of the, for example, in one of the references to the current policy, it says section D. So there are pieces of 7500 that are in several different policies, and that's why I wanted you to be able to see all, where they were in all three.
So the three
It's not-
policies still exist in addition to the proposed policy. Is that correct?
The sections that do not apply to this would still exist until we finish our conversion, yes. So we would need to speak to repealing like that section of the policy when we vote on this.
Good question. Anything else? Questions, comments on that, or any of the other two? Even though we've moved on, just in case. All right.
Would you be okay with an adjustment in the highlighted section?
I'm okay with that. Are there any objections to that? Any questions or concerns about that change?
Mr. Super?
Well, no, not at all. Actually, though, I saw that on the agenda, and that paragraph is potentially a little bit problematic as it is. So with the board's permission, I was going to talk to April about it and see whether there might be an adjustment that makes it a little less onerous anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's fine. So what they'll do is they could, Dr. Miller, I'm sorry. I was just going to say they can make that adjustment between the two of them when it's posted for the agenda. If we want to make more changes and we're not comfortable at the end of the month, then we can still push the process forward. Otherwise, we can accept it. Dr. Miller?
Would it help clarify, like in the first sentence in A, licensed and professional staff, parentheses, exempt, to make that distinction, because we kind of flip back and forth between licensed and professional, which predominantly, as I understand it, are the exempt employees, versus the non-exempt. To use the same terminology throughout, and it might clean it up, make it a little simpler,
I don't see an issue with that at all.
I think it's a good point. Any other suggestions or questions? If not, we'll have all those changes made, and then we can make sure we review them for when they're posted before the business meeting, and then we'll obviously address them again. Anything else, April?
That's
Is that it? Okay. Thank you, ladies.